Have you ever looked closely at your bank account and felt a sudden, suffocating sense of personal failure? Across Europe and the Western world right now, millions of highly educated, hard-working adults are quietly drowning in this exact same despair, desperately trying to survive housing crises and stagnant wages. You did everything you were explicitly told to do. You followed every single rule of the path to success, and yet you are still struggling just to survive the month. The chilling truth is that the people who loved you the most actually handed you a beautifully drawn map to a world that simply no longer exists. By the end of this broadcast, you will discover the exact mechanics of this generational betrayal, giving you the clarity and the tactical edge to finally rewrite your own financial reality. We must begin by ruthlessly dismantling a very comforting, deeply ingrained lie. The generation that raised you did not offer a malicious deception, but rather they suffered from a profound case of survivorship bias, cleverly disguised as wisdom. Your parents lived through an unprecedented economic anomaly in human history, a brief window where a single, average paycheck could easily afford a suburban home, a reliable car, and a comfortable life. They looked at their own effortless success, achieved in a highly forgiving and heavily subsidized environment, and falsely concluded that their formula was universal. When you failed to replicate their exact results in the year 2008 or 2023, they did not question the broken economic system, but coldly and unfairly questioned your effort. The very first illusion you were sold was the sacred, unspoken contract of corporate loyalty. You were programmed from a young age to believe that if you protected the company would indefinitely protect you and your family. That philosophy was entirely true in the 1970s, when lucrative pensions were guaranteed, and lifelong employment was the absolute standard of society. However, the modern corporate landscape underwent a brutal, calculated evolution, shifting every single ounce of financial risk directly from their balance sheets onto your fragile shoulders. You were meticulously trained to be a blindly loyal soldier in a cutthroat gig economy world, rendering your dedication not just useless, but actively dangerous to your long-term survival. Next, we must examine the deliberate weaponization of higher education. You were repeatedly instructed to simply get a degree, absolutely any degree, and a prosperous, secure future would be automatically guaranteed. For your parents, a university diploma was a cheap, universal skeleton key to middle management, often costing just a few $100s a semester, which they could pay off with a simple summer job. For you, it transformed into an intricate, inescapable trap, locking you into tens of thousands of dollars in unforgivable debt before your adult life even truly began. The absolute cruelty here lies in the fact that you internalized this structural failure, quietly blaming your own choices instead of recognizing a market that had fundamentally and permanently changed its rules. Then comes the ultimate moral imperative of the middle class, the desperate, panicked race for home ownership. Buying a house was framed to you not as a calculated, mathematical financial maneuver, but as the definitive proof that you were finally a responsible adult. Your parents purchased property when real estate cost mere fractions of their annual income, and they simply sat back, watching their wealth effortlessly compound over several decades. You, on the other hand, were pushed by their expectations into heavily manipulated, hyperinflated housing markets, draining your limited capital just to meet arbitrary societal milestones. When those markets inevitably crashed, you lost much more than just your money. You lost your perceived identity and your standing in the eyes of your own family. Perhaps the most damaging psychological inheritance of all was the absolute, deafening silence surrounding financial hardship. You were raised in an environment where money was constantly discussed as a finite resource, yet the actual, terrifying anxiety of managing it was completely hidden from your view. Because your parents projected a flawless facade of unwavering stability, you grew up implicitly believing that competent, successful adults simply do not experience financial panic. Therefore, when you encountered your first major economic crisis, you isolated yourself in deep, paralyzing shame, remaining completely unaware that chronic financial struggle is a meticulously designed feature of the modern economy, rather than a personal character defect. The grand betrayal of your upbringing was not ultimately about bad economic policy, but about a catastrophic lack of psychological preparation for the real world. You were meticulously programmed for stability, yet thrust violently into an era defined by relentless, unapologetic chaos. You followed severely outdated formulas. You played by completely obsolete rules. And when the inevitable collapse happened, you were left entirely alone to absorb the heavy blame. Your current financial trauma is absolutely not a reflection of your inability to manage your money, but simply the painful, destructive friction between the reality you were falsely promised and the harsh reality you were actually given. To survive and thrive in this highly unforgiving era, you must aggressively unlearn the polite, comforting fictions of the past. Loyalty is now merely a commodity to be traded. Education is a strictly calculated investment to be weighed, and modern survival requires cold, adaptable pragmatism. It is time to stop carrying the heavy, suffocating burden of a generational lie that was never yours to uphold in the first place. Look at the economic system clearly, understand the true mechanics of the game you are actually playing, and start making ruthless decisions based on the world exactly as it is today. The comforting illusion is finally over, and right now, your real education begins.